Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Two men have been arrested in connection with the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. A 34-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder in connection. Meanwhile, a 41-year-old man from Knowsley has been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Olivia died nearly 2 weeks ago after she was shot in her home by an unknown gunman. GB News can report that the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has passed 27,000 this year. Around 1,000 migrants have crossed over today. The number of crossings has increased in the last 2 days as weather conditions in the Channel improved. The migrants have been picked up by Border Force officers and taken for processing. Liz Truss is defending her plans to cut the national insurance rise a day before the next Prime Minister is announced. Speaking on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg programme, she refused to be drawn on her plans to help struggling families, but said she'll reveal them within a week of winning the post. She also said it was reasonable that the wealthiest received the biggest benefit from any cut to national insurance.
It's fair. We promised in our manifesto that we would not raise national insurance. I opposed the decision to raise it in Cabinet because it was the wrong decision. I believe it is the right thing.
With it, though. You could have quit if you felt that strongly.
Well, I could, but I preferred to stay in and fight my corner because I'm not somebody who quits.
Meanwhile, speaking on the same programme, Rishi Sunak said if he becomes Prime Minister, he can't rule out introducing electricity blackouts due to rising energy prices.
What I've said is that we shouldn't rule anything out. I mean, we're facing a genuine emergency. I think anyone pretending that that isn't the situation isn't being straight with the country. And by the way, across Europe, those plans are being drawn up. And I would imagine
we should prepare for blackouts, do you think?
Well, as I said, again, I'm not there. I'm not inside. But what I would say is we shouldn't rule anything out because the situation is serious.
Boris Johnson is urging the Tory party to back the next Prime Minister wholeheartedly, regardless of who wins. Writing in the Sunday Express, Mr Johnson praised the abilities of both candidates, saying it was time to put the national interest first. The outgoing Prime Minister also described his last 3 years in charge as tough but exhilarating. The Home Secretary says the Met Police must learn from the appalling mistakes of the past. Writing to the force's new commissioner, Priti Patel stressed the need to restore trust and confidence. It follows a number of high-profile scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. However, former Met Detective Chief Superintendent Kevin Hurley told us Priti Patel is simply trying to appear tough.
This is a cynical last gasp of a failing Home Secretary trying to prove she's strong in the hope that Suella Braverman doesn't get the job. So what it's actually done is demonstrated yet another one of her failings, because it's made us a little bit less safe. All it's done is given the men and women in the front line serving us right now another kicking to further demoralise them.
The 8-year-old twins and an 18-year-old woman killed in a violent incident in Ireland have now been named. Police say twins Christy and Chelsea Corley and their sister Lisa Cash died overnight at a house in South Dublin. Their 14-year-old brother is in hospital with serious injuries. A man in his early 20s is in custody and police aren't looking for anyone else. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We'll have more news at the top of the next hour. This evening, the UK weather is looking unsettled as low pressure sits to the west of us, bringing in spells of rain. Let's take a look at the details. Southwest England will see further showers. Some could be heavy and perhaps thundery as well, turning windy for a time, especially around the coasts. Mostly dry across southeast England and London, with clear spells and generally light winds, the possibility of a few showers mainly in the north. An increasing risk of showery rain across southern parts of Wales this evening. This could be heavy in places and perhaps thundery too, turning windy. Mostly cloudy this evening across the Midlands, with an increasing risk of a few showers, which could be on the heavy side. Feeling quite humid with the temperatures around 19 Celsius and wind staying light. A mixed end to the day for north-east England. There will be the risk of a few showers, though most places should stay dry. Wind staying light with temperatures around 21 Celsius. A mainly dry evening for southern parts of Scotland, with plenty of clear spells and generally light winds. The risk of a few light showers, mainly in the east. A largely dry end to the day across Northern Ireland, with just some fair weather cloud around. A fairly low risk of an isolated shower later on around the coast. Overnight, bands of heavy rain and brisk winds will move northwards. A warm and muggy night with temperatures staying in double figures. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Good morning, everyone. You're watching and listening to GB News. This is The Political Correction. I'm Arlene Foster, and today I'm joined in the studio by Paul Embry and by Caroline Harris, Welsh Labour Deputy Leader and MP for Swansea East. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists. It's about you telling us what you think. So, coming up this hour, after a summer of campaigning, tomorrow the country will find out who their next Prime Minister will be. We'll be looking back at the race and discussing what the winners should prioritise on their first day in office. We will be looking back at the legacy of the last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, following his death this week at the age of 91. We will also be talking about policing in the UK after a report found that the public feels officers are distracted from solving crime by so-called woke causes. And, as ever, here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, have your email read out on the show, then email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is So on Friday, voting officially closed in the Conservative leadership contest, and the two candidates, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, will find out which of them has won the ballot of Tory members at 12:30 tomorrow, with the winner being formally appointed by Her Majesty the Queen on Tuesday. So, Caroline, as the long race comes to an end, what have you made of it, and what have you made of the two candidates? And that's to you, as someone who knows both of them quite well, because you're in Parliament and you've seen them out and about.
Yeah, well, it's been too long, it's been too painful, and there's been Tories talking to Tories and not listening, and certainly not talking to the rest of the country. It's been a dreadful experience. I gave up watching the hustings. It was nothing new. It was just cheerleaders flying flags for which candidate they'd already picked, and I can't see that any of them are ready to hit the ground running as they need to be to help us get this country back on its feet.
It's funny you should say it's too long, because I think that's the feeling of everybody right across the piece, including Tory MPs themselves. I had Theresa Villiers on my show on Friday, and she said she felt it was too long. And Paul, I mean, there has been just repetition of the message during all of those hustings. There hasn't been anything new, has there?
No, and I think it's driven most people mad, to be honest. I mean, look, of course you have to have an election of this kind when you're choosing a new leader of a political party, a new leader of the country. But I cannot see how it could not have been truncated in some way. The idea that it had to go on this long, I think is completely unnecessary. And I think we've got to a point where the public are saying, look, you know, for goodness sake, just install the new leader and let's get on with running the country.
I think it's quite strange, actually, because the first part of it was quite truncated. Do you remember when we had 11 candidates and that all of a sudden it was down to 2? And actually, we didn't really get to hear very much from people like Kemi Badenoch, like Tom Tugendhat. They were dismissed quite quickly. And instead, then we had the 2 front runners over a long period of time. Do you think that they will be looking at this system and thinking this needs to be changed?
I think they probably have to. I mean, there was a time where both main political parties, in terms of electing the leaders, just relied on MPs. I mean, that changed for the Labour Party in 1980. And for the Conservative Party, I think around about William Hague's time, about 20-odd years ago. Now, I'm not particularly in favour of going back to you know, the time when you just gave the decision to members of Parliament, although it certainly happened a lot quicker. I mean, when in 1976 Harold Wilson was replaced by Jim Callaghan in the Labour Party, that process, because it was just MPs, took place really, really quickly. So in some respects, it's better to have a wider debate and to include the membership to give that extra kind of democratic mandate to the leader.
The reason why we've had it for so long is that the Conservative Party membership did feel cheated with when Theresa May got elected, and they were not going to allow that to happen again. Talking to colleagues in Westminster, they were all saying this will not be a coronation, despite the fact, you know, probably it would have been quicker to do that. But the membership wouldn't have put up with that.
And what I think has been interesting as well is, as you were saying, the whole thing has been very stage managed. But they are nowadays. I mean, campaigns like this are completely choreographed because spin doctors are petrified that someone is going to
drop the ball.
And it's going to be, you know, like Ed Miliband eating the bacon sandwich, or Tony Blair being berated by the woman about the NHS, and then that dominates the papers the next day. So they try and arrange it so these things never happen. The problem is, I think, it takes the dynamism and the real human feel out of the campaigns. I mean, neither of the candidates, from what I can see, has gone to the public, has gone in a public forum and said, right, for me, this is not just about the Conservative Party leadership. Yes, of course, we've got to go to Conservative Party forums and have the debate because those are the people with the votes. But actually, I'm going to look beyond the membership and go to the public as well. So put me in a town square in, you know, the north of England or somewhere like that, and let me, a bit like John Major did actually in '92 when he went around with his famous soapbox and said, you know, hit me with any question you like and let me have it, and I'll respond to you and we'll debate, and I don't mind being heckled. You never really see politicians do that anymore, and I think that's why our politics is more sterile than it once was.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because people are saying they haven't taken account of the wider electorate. They have been very focused on the Conservative Party, and leading academic and pollster Matthew Goodwin recently penned an article in which he said the Conservative Party was in the fast lane towards electoral wipeout, comparing the latest polls to 1997 when Tony Blair took over from John Major. Paul, are things that bleak for the Conservative Party? And if so, what does it mean for the Labour Party?
I think there's still a long way to go. I mean, if I were advising Keir Starmer, I would be saying, look, don't get out of your pram yet. You know, we're still a year or two away from a general election. And actually, if you're going to win a general election as an opposition party, you have to have clear and sustainable leads from a couple of years out of a general election before really you can assume that you're going to win it. I certainly think the Conservative Party have got big problems, Arlene. I mean, there's no doubt there is a sense among the public that the promises that were made in 2019 haven't been fulfilled, notwithstanding pandemics and whatever. The cost of living crisis is really beginning to hit people hard. People are struggling to make ends meet. But I think also there's a sense among people that the government just has not got that all-important thing that governments need to have, which is grip. You know, people are people want a basic competence, whatever their political colours, their political ideology. At the very least, they want governments to be able to run the country effectively, even if they don't always agree with what it is that they're doing. And I think at the moment there's a sense among people that look, the country just isn't functioning as it ought to be functioning. The NHS is in crisis. GP waiting lists are as long as your arm. The police, are ineffective in terms of arresting people and preventing crime. We've got problems around people getting driving licences and passports.
Yeah.
And that sense of a lack of grip, I think, can sound the death knell for...
It's about having a plan to deal with those issues.
And I think past governments, I disagree with pretty much everything that Thatcher did.
Yeah.
But no one could accuse her of not having a grip on the country and taking it where she thought it needed to go. I don't think this government has got...
Having a grip and knowing where to go. And Caroline, obviously people will be looking at Labour and whether they have a plan and whether they have the strategic vision to take us beyond where we are at the moment.
Yeah.
What is the answer?
The answer is yes, of course we have. And what I would say is that Keir's certainly not thinking that, we are now going to just walk in and become... he's going to become Prime Minister, as much as I'd like that to happen. But I think one of the biggest problems that whoever takes over tomorrow, and let's be honest about it, it's going to be Liz Truss, is going to have is a problem with her own party, her own backbenchers. She was not the choice of the parliamentary party. Rishi Sunak was. She may be the choice of the membership, but she's going to have a lot of people behind her who are going to be agitating, and I don't think it's going to be very long before we have civil war breaking out. And, I've been in the position where we've had a party leader who was not popular with the parliamentary party. It makes it very, very hard to get anything done. Bad enough in opposition. In government, it's the country at stake. And we can't afford to have that kind of leadership of the country at the moment. We need to have solidarity and unity.
And I suppose that's one of the reasons why Boris Johnson, writing in the Express today, has talked about getting behind the new leader and supporting the new leader.
And that's strange, though, isn't it? Why does he feel the need to say that?
Do you know what? I think it speaks well to him because, he could have just said, well, I'm not going to get involved in this. I'm going to step back. I'm going to do new things. But what he's actually doing is trying to rally the troops behind whoever, and we all think it's going to be Liz Truss. I think that's fair to say. Do you think there's something else there, Caroline?
Yeah, of course there is. He's going to say in the press...
Such a cynic, Caroline.
Such a cynic.
I'm a realist, Paul. He's going to say in the press, I'm going to be there making sure that everybody gets behind the Prime Minister. He's going to be shouting loudest and he's going to be the most agitated. A bit like Theresa May was for him. He's going to be the same for as long as he's there.
Well, that's the question. Is he going to be there? What's he going to do next, I suppose, is the big question.
Well, I can't wait to see him on the backbenches.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, because he is a big character, isn't he? And there's going to be quite a few big characters on the backbenches now when you think about Michael Gove, Rob and Boris himself.
I mean, certainly Michael Gove will be a loss. I mean, he's one of the few Tories who I think is very cerebral and very capable and a thinker, as you say, Caroline. I think the next few months are going to get interesting because all of the evidence, certainly what we're reading in the papers over the last few days, is that Truss is going to follow this kind of Thatcherite type of classical liberal agenda.
And not just in a clause.
Well, exactly, yeah, and then riding around in tanks, rolling back the frontiers of the state, getting the state out of people's lives, low taxes for the rich, etc. And I think the danger for the Tories is that is not what the working class voters who flocked to them in 2019 wanted, particularly during a cost of living crisis. I think actually what lots of these voters want is not an overbearing state, but at the very least a protective state, which is there for them and their communities in hard times, such as during a cost of living crisis. And I have to say, I think if Liz Truss thinks that in places like the Red Wall, that old kind of Thatcherite, get the state out of your lives, leave everything, hand everything over to the market, privatise everything, row back on workers' rights, is going to make people stick with the Tories in those communities, I think she's got another thing coming. But not just tactically, I think in terms of the very fabric of the country, actually, if we go back to those days of, you think of the early 80s, where Thatcher did follow that philosophy, and suddenly we saw unemployment going through the roof, 3 million unemployed and riots in some of our inner cities. If that kind of prescription is applied during an economic crisis, a cost of living crisis, then frankly it could lead anywhere. It could lead to all sorts of unrest. I think the Tories need to be aware of that.
Yeah. And that's not the first time I've heard that. But I mean, what do you make of Wes Streeting, who says that the Tories are planning to lose the next general election? I mean, what does he mean by that, Caroline?
Do you know, it's something that I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks, because I really think that we're in such a mess in this country. I don't know if they've got a plan to get us out of this mess. And I would not be at all surprised if their plan is, let's get to a general election, let's lose, let Labour get us back on our feet, and then we can criticise them for everything that they haven't done. You know, and I really think that could well be a plan.
And do you think that's what he meant by...
I think that's what he meant.
That's interesting, and we will see if she has a plan tomorrow and Tuesday indeed. But Caroline, what is the new PM's most pressing issue, and what should be their priority on their first day? I think I know what the answer is going to be.
The cost of living. It's unbelievable. I mean, people are people are struggling now, but people are absolutely terrified about the future. The cost of utility bills, you know, I don't think a day goes by when somebody doesn't tell me how much their bill is going up by. People are worried about food, the price of food, can they access food? We're going to be seeing queues in supermarkets for the end-of-life stuff. Mark my words, that's where we're going.
Paul, obviously, cost of living, energy crisis are the domestic issues that have to be dealt with internationally. Is it still Ukraine being on the top of the agenda?
I think it probably will be Ukraine. I mean, I go back to the 1997 general election when Labour talked about having an ethical foreign policy. I don't think actually they did develop an ethical foreign policy. I would like to see, and I have to say this is probably absurdly optimistic, an ethical foreign policy that isn't built around hypocrisy, because I think that the problem is, Arlene, so much of our foreign engagement is built around hypocrisy. We talk about human rights abuses of tyrants like Putin, and that's fine, we should expose those, but at the same time, you know, we're happy to trade and do deals with Saudi Arabia, which has got, you know, one of the worst human rights records on the planet. So if we are going to talk about foreign policy, then at least, you know, we should try to stop the hypocrisy, or at least admit that we're hypocritical, because the truth is that we are.
And there's so much going on in the world. I was speaking to someone around the Uyghurs in China on Friday, and the fact that this United Nations report has come out and talked about the human rights abuses that are going on there, and what are we going to do to raise the plight of those Uyghur people. There's millions of people there, and nearly 1 million of them are in forced detention camps. I mean, that's going on in our world today. It's just incredible to think of that, you know, when we're sitting here having this free conversation. But look, there's a lot to take in for the new Prime Minister.
At the same time, I would say, Arlene, that the last thing we need, in my view, is a new Cold War. I mean, we're going to be talking about Gorbachev a bit later. The last thing we need is a new Cold War. I think it takes two to tango. Whatever criticisms we have of the Chinese, and unquestionably it's an authoritarian government, I think you also have to look at America, which for too long has tried to act as the policeman of the world. I think is saber-rattling around issues such as Taiwan is guilty, in my view, itself of foreign policy hypocrisy. You only have to look at some of the historical invasions of Iraq and places like that, where it's completely ignored international law, and you look at its record in Latin America, where it has deliberately tried to destabilise elected governments that just didn't happen to be sympathetic to the American programme. So I think we need a much broader look at international
I think that's fair, and I take your point on Taiwan and America, but I do think we can't turn a blind eye to some of these things that are going on in the world, in Myanmar and places like that as well. But look, we'll come back to all of that later on.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
The reality is that more and more people will be solely focused on survival, as well as falling far short of reaching a minimum level standard. It's also been reported today that contingency plans are being drawn up by police chiefs to deal with the fallout that could result from millions of households falling into financial difficulty. Carolyn, that makes for stark reading, but how bad is this going to get over the next couple of months?
It's going to be terrifying. I mean, in my constituency, it's not an affluent constituency, so we've always had pockets of deprivation. And for the last 7 years, I've actually run lunch clubs during the summer to make sure that kids were able to play and have lunch. This year, we had the highest turnout of kids, but we had the lowest contribution from the general public. Businesses contributed, but normally, normal people, you know, the church groups and whatever will always come and give something. We didn't have that this year. We're coming into Christmas where we run a And Everyone Deserves a Christmas campaign, and we give people in need cooked dinner or a really nice Christmas hamper. And I've already got people asking now if they can actually put their name down for a hamper. We don't even start asking for names normally till the end of November. So I know that people are already terrified they're not going to be able to afford food.
Yeah, it's a worrying time, Paul, for many families. And my worry is that the more we talk about it, the more anxious people get. But we're talking about it because it's a reality, isn't that it?
It's a national emergency, in my view. It's a national emergency, and it needs to be treated as such. We need a freeze on the price cap. We need to tax the excess and unexpected profits of some of the oil and gas giants. And if we don't do that, then I think we're failing millions of people, not just individual citizens, but businesses as well. I mean, you go on social media and you see tweets from business owners who are saying, look, this is what my energy company is telling me my bill is going to be. Some of them are going up 3 or 4 times what they're paying at the moment.
Well, I was talking to a business last week and their bill has tripled, and the contract they had with their supplier was cancelled by the supplier because they were on a fixed term. And they were able to cancel that and triple the electricity bill.
And we're going to see businesses collapse. And what does that mean? Businesses collapse, people are thrown out of work. All of a sudden, unemployment claimants go up, the tax revenues that government is taking in goes down. That then creates the economic problem. We're on the brink of a recession anyway. We're told that we're going to enter recession later this year. So yes, it's a national emergency and it needs to be treated as such. And in the longer term, I think we have got to have a national debate about our chronic lack of energy independence in this country. I mean, I know we've discussed it on this show before. It's something that I've banged the drum about. The very fact that an advanced industrial country like ours has found itself in such a position where we've got no energy security effectively. How did that situation come about? We were, in my view, too slow on nuclear. I don't think we've investigated the potential for fracking or clean coal technology. I'm very much in favour of the green agenda, but I'm also in favour of the lights not going out and people being able to heat their homes. We should never have found ourselves in this situation, and we need a big public debate about that.
No, we do. And people say, oh, well, we should have done something about it 15, 20 years ago. Yes, we should, but we didn't. So let's do something about it now. And I think that's why I was pleased to see, as one of his last acts as Prime Minister, that Boris Johnson announced the funding for Sizewell C, the nuclear plant, because at least that's an indication of us taking back our energy security. There's more that can be done, of course. We need to do more on hydrogen. That's a new green fuel, so let's look at that. Let's make more of it. Tidal. There's much more that we could be doing. So we need to be bolder on energy security, but of course that doesn't deal with the here and now, and there does need to be some interventions, targeted interventions, Caroline, I would say.
I mean, something we haven't spoke about is people who need electricity for medical purposes at home. My daughter-in-law is actually on nocturnal dialysis. She uses 100 times more electricity than we do. She's one of very many thousands of people. The kidney charities are absolutely terrified. They're already being inundated with people asking, where will I go to get a grant to keep my dialysis machine on? I mean, we can't allow people to not have their medication because they're afraid of what the electricity is going to cost.
You know, in my view, this situation with the lack of energy security, this was entirely foreseeable. You know, all it took was one international crisis in order to put us in the position that we're now in, where we've got a chronic lack of energy independence and people are suffering. There are real-life tales, as you recounted there, Caroline, in terms of people suffering. And we should never have found ourselves in this position. I mean, as I've said on the show before, we've seen PR stunts by energy ministers over recent years where they've gone along to coal-fired power stations and have had their picture taken as the stations being knocked down or decommissioned and presenting it as some great leap forward. Did they not understand that just one international crisis later and then Britain is going to be facing an energy crisis itself and people are possibly going to struggle to heat their homes? Why did anyone not think, well, actually, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We have got to maintain some degree of energy independence, even whilst we transition to a green agenda. But we've hit the cliff edge. That's the truth of it. And you know, the cliff was looming, but for some reason, politicians decided not to.
No, because the focus was solely on renewables and moving towards net zero without having a transition path that was realistic, without realising that we also needed to have our energy security if there was a problem. But look, I have no doubt we'll return to energy security and the cost of energy for many, many weeks to come. But let's move on now to an international story. And thousands of people in Russia have paid their final respects to Mikhail Gorbachev, who died on Tuesday at the age of 91. He was the last ruler of the Soviet Union and has been described as changing the course of history. But current Russian President Vladimir Putin did not attend the ceremony, saying the end of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Now, Paul, how important a figure was Mikhail Gorbachev?
He was huge. I mean, I remember as a kid in the 80s when he visited the UK, he was treated almost like a pop star. He visited Downing Street and then he met the crowds outside and stuff. And this was very new because prior to then, Soviet leaders had always been very dull and austere, you know, the big bushy eyebrows and the fur hat. And then all of a sudden you had this young leader like Gorbachev, who actually had a personality and actually had a sense of humour and seemed very human. And Margaret Thatcher herself, no sympathy with communists, of course, even talks about how he was a man that she could do business with.
But I think you've made a... I mean, he was a communist to his very end. I mean, that's the point. That a lot of people think, oh, he left communism and... No, he wanted to reform communism.
Yeah, and he certainly didn't want to see the collapse of the Soviet Union, by the way. He was very saddened by the collapse of the Soviet Union, and there are many people who followed that line of thinking, who some of whom were not at all sympathetic towards the Soviet Union, but felt that it was necessary to have a counterbalance to the United States, to stop the United States from, as we touched on earlier, acting as the policeman of the world, and to have that bulwark against, you know, unfettered US power. And arguably, when you look at what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union in terms of things like Iraq, you could argue that America was able to do some of that stuff because the Soviet Union didn't exist. But, I mean, look, on Gorbachev, there's no doubt that he He brought about a thaw in relations between the East and West, no question about it. He helped to hasten the end of the Cold War. I think he was broadly a man of peace. He wanted to avert a Third World War. I think when you look at what happened when the Berlin Wall came down in, was it 1990, I think, he chose not to send tanks in. I mean, he saw the writing was on the wall and thought, look, this is going to happen. We're not going to be sending tanks in, which was very unusual because prior to that, if there was any threat to the political integrity or the territorial integrity of the Eastern Bloc, you think of Hungary in 1956, you think of the Prague Springs in 1968. The Soviet leaders were unhesitant in putting down those rebellions. So broadly, I think he will be remembered as a man of peace who helped to hasten the end of the Cold War.
And of course, Putin, Caroline, didn't give him a state funeral, didn't go to his funeral. And we're told that Gorbachev disagreed with the invasion of Ukraine, but still, he was a statesman that he's refused to honour.
I think that says more about Putin than about Gorbachev, doesn't it? And, you know, I wouldn't want him at my funeral either.
He was going to come, as far as I know.
Paul, tell him he's uninvited.
But I suppose, Paul, you've really touched on there because Gorbachev was really about the ending of the Cold War and working with Reagan and Thatcher. I mean, the fear now, I suppose, for a lot of us is that it's coming again, this Cold War between what is Russia now and the West. Well,
I would say in response to that, Arlene, I don't think that modern-day Russia has anything like the strength, the capability of the former Soviet Union. I mean, I know people have said, look, Putin wants to bring about a greater Russia, he's got imperialist ambitions. I would say to people, well, look, they've been bogged down in Ukraine for 6 or 7 months now. And are we seriously saying that a country... I mean, in days gone by, as I said before, when the Soviets rolled into places like Hungary and Czechoslovakia, it was over within days because they had huge...
But he thought it was going to be over in days. That's
he probably did. And the truth is it hasn't been. So having been bogged down in for 6 or 7 months in Ukraine, the idea that Russia has got the capability to kind of reinvent the old Soviet Union, I just don't think is realistic. I mean, interestingly, going back to Gorbachev, his legacy inside the Soviet Union is nothing like it was in the West, because lots of people did blame him, even though he didn't intend for the collapse of the Soviet Union. Lots of people blamed him for it, and you know, whenever a poll is carried out in Russia of the most favourite Soviet leaders over the years, he's generally at the bottom of it. So maybe Putin, and I think it was churlish of Putin not to go along, but maybe he's thinking, well, this guy wasn't popular anyway, what have I got to lose, perhaps?
Yeah, well, he said, yes, he's looking inward, as he always does.
Sure.
As he always does. Anyway, coming up on the political correction, we'll be talking about so-called woke policing in the UK. We'll also be joined by a royal expert who will tell us exactly what will happen on Tuesday when Her Majesty the Queen appoints the new Prime Minister. And as ever, on the political correction, we want to hear from you. So if you want to get involved in the conversation this morning, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, it's our new Prime Minister special, with Liz Truss expected to win the keys to number 10 tomorrow. In the big question, can she win the next general election? I'll be asking Anne Widdecombe, Edwina Currie and Vince Cable. Plus, the political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Nigel Nelson, Neil and Christine Hamilton live in the studio, and the brilliant commentator Sam Dowler. And in my big opinion, my manifesto for our new PM. In Liz, we must all trust. That's our new Prime Minister special, tonight at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. Lots of you have been getting in touch as usual, and we love to hear from you. Paul, what's the latest from our viewers?
Well, we've got one from Andy, who says, when the Ukrainian war started, many countries imposed sanctions on Russia. These included freezing the assets of Mr. Putin and vast numbers of oligarchs. Is it not time to sell off their assets and use the vast wealth frozen in bank accounts to pay for the assistance being given to Ukraine? That's from Andy.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Carolyn, what have you got from our viewers?
I'm going to go for Jan, who said, so sick of all this pantomime. None of the politicians on either side, Conservative or Labour, come across as strong or competent as Arlene Foster. Don't think I can take much more of this. Foster for Prime Minister.
I don't think the country's ready for that at all.
We'll run your campaign, Ali.
A DUP government in charge of the whole UK. That'll be interesting, wouldn't it?
Here's Treve. He's saying, Arlene, the Tory leadership contest was at lightning speed compared to the 4.5 months Labour took to elect Starmer. So there's somebody remembering the Labour election contest. Have you anything more there?
Yeah, Mike says the two runners for the contest are perhaps the best of a terrible bunch of MPs. However, it has taken far too long and Boris should have been sacked weeks ago. It's time for a general election and a total change to our parliamentary system so that every vote cast is represented. This first past the post for Parliament is out of date and unfair. I, for one, have no confidence in either candidate or the current system.
Yeah, so the discussion about should our system change, I think, is one that we might have on the show someday, because we haven't had that discussion for quite a while now.
No,
you know.
I mean, I have to say, in terms of PR, I'm vehemently opposed to PR. I think it breaks that direct link between the constituent and the MP. And invariably what you find in countries that do have PR is all of the meat of the negotiations takes place after the election, when voters are completely cut out of the process.
True.
And then, you know, often governments will go into coalition, they'll do behind-the-scenes deals. Apparently the DUP know a thing or two about that.
Yeah, we do.
Arlene, by all accounts. Got quite a good deal, apparently, from what I remember as well.
The old confidence and supply agreement.
And I think it undermines, personally, I think it undermines democracy.
Yeah, well, maybe we're not going to have a debate about it, because I think you agree with that as well, and so do I. So maybe we're sticking to first past the post. But anyway, we're going to move on now, because Home Secretary Priti Patel has told police to focus on the basics after a report found that the public feels officers are distracted from solving crime by woke causes. The Policy Exchange think tank called for police to be barred from taking the knee or wearing campaign badges on their uniform because of the risk of appearing to have partisan political views. The report also cited polling which showed that 4 in 10 voters thought the police were more concerned with being woke than solving crime. Paul, does the UK police system have a problem?
I think it's got a massive problem. I mean, I read the report. It was a really interesting report written by a former detective chief inspector. And he effectively says the UK police force have lost their way. He describes the clear-up rates for the more common types of everyday crime, burglary, theft, robbery, that sort of thing, as woefully low. And the truth is, those are the kinds of crimes that affect people day to day in their everyday lives. They blight lives, they blight communities, usually working class communities, actually, because it's working class communities that often suffer most from crime. And the report confirms really that there's a perception among the public, and I think it's a fair perception, that actually the police have become too political. They've become social activists or social workers, and they're more interested in floating their kind of woke credentials than they are in tackling everyday crime. Now, whether or not that's a slightly distorted image and slightly exaggerated image, the reality is that is what a lot of people feel. And I think when they see the police taking part in pride parades and dancing the Macarena and taking the knee and, you know, arresting army veterans in a high-profile case recently because he satirised the pride flag. I think that angers people because people say, look, we don't want you to get involved in this stuff. We just want you dealing with the crime that affects our communities, and we don't like seeing you dance on pride parades. Stop it. That's not what you're there for. So it's an interesting report. Whether or not, you know, the government's going to act on it. These reports are published from time to time, and they're just left gathering dust on a shelf sometimes. I would like to think the government's going to act on this one.
And Caroline,
yeah,
you agree with that?
I disagree with Paul on the being at the Pride and at carnivals, because I think they damned if they do and they damned if they don't. If they don't get involved and they seem to be standing there like centurions, then they're accused of being intimidating, and if they get involved, they're accused of being woke. I don't agree with that at all. But what I would say, Paul, is that you mentioned social workers. I think there's so many social problems which may be born from crime or will induce crime, that's why they ended up being social workers. They have so much work to do on the ground, mental health work. They are left to pick up the pieces in so many cases. And the biggest problem is that to be a police officer now, you need to be an academic. You know, what happened to the old days when you had people coming into the police force who could do the policing and not worry about the paperwork? We've lost that. We're losing experienced officers. They're retiring early because the stress and the pressure is too much. That's what we need to do, is get back to the policing where you didn't need a degree. You came in because you were good at solving crime, you were good in the community, you were a good community resource.
Well, let me be devil's advocate about that point about too much paperwork, etc. That has come because they've been challenged so much, and we're asking them to be accountable to politicians like ourselves and saying, you need to prove that you did X, Y and Z in your investigation, and you have to write it all down and you have to give an account of that. And so they spend so much time doing that sort of work that they're not actually on the ground doing the community policing that they should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the PCSOs come in. I mean, the PCSOs have been a fantastic community resource, and we've got more of them than in Wales because the Welsh Government have funded it. But that is what we are lacking. There's got to be a better way to streamline the paperwork and to get the police out there doing the police work, not the social work. So everything else, social care, social services, they all need to step up a bit to do their bit, so the police get a bit of freed up to get on with doing the policing.
And I think some of the research that's come out recently in terms of the police's response or lack of response to crime, in some cases, grade 1 emergency 999 calls, is really worrying. I mean, I have to say the BBC has done some good research on this recently where it's found that response times are longer. Sometimes police are taking hours to turn up in response to 999 calls, sometimes days, in fact, believe it or not. Often serious crimes are reported, but there's no serious follow-up. Inquiries are not made. And the experience of lots of people is that they go to the police in an hour of need. You know, how many times do we have to call the police in our lives? Probably, thankfully, few for most of us. And when you do call upon them, you expect them to be there. But I think there's just a sense among people that they just aren't doing their bread and butter jobs. And I know it's almost a bit of a cliche to say, look, you know, the police have abandoned the streets. But I think actually now there is a genuine sense that police have abandoned the streets. I mean, I cannot remember the last time I saw a bobby walking the beat. I mean, it genuinely probably years ago. And even now, I know we live in an era of high-tech crime and cybercrime and online fraud and all of this sort of stuff. But the truth is, in my view, that that kind of local community intelligence-led policing, which comes about through walking the streets, getting to know the community, getting to know who the potential bad people are likely to commit crimes, engaging face-to-face with people. If you take that away, and it seems to me that you know, that role is now diminished within the police, then that kind of intelligence-led policing just doesn't happen anymore. And what you get is a police force that effectively just turns up with its sirens blaring after the crime has been committed. I think there's a real sense of dissatisfaction among the public.
Yeah, and it's about perception as well, isn't it? And what the reality is, because we know there's a lot of really good police officers out there doing their job on a day and daily basis. But
and we need more police officers.
And to be fair to the outgoing PM, he did make a commitment to bring in more police officers and has delivered on bringing more police officers to the fore. But We're going to move on now because this Tuesday either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will head to Balmoral in Scotland to meet Her Majesty the Queen and be appointed the UK's next Prime Minister. It will be a huge break from tradition. During her 70-year reign, the monarch has had an audience with the new Prime Minister at Buckingham Palace. But have you ever wondered what actually happens when a new leader is appointed by the Queen? Well, we're delighted to say that royal expert Richard Fitzwilliams joins us now. Richard, it's good to have you with us this morning. Tell us what will happen on Tuesday when the new Prime Minister meets Her Majesty the Queen in Balmoral.
Well, this, of course, Arlene, is a pivotal part of our unwritten constitution. Alongside her red boxes, signing bills into law, no monarch has refused that since Queen Anne and the bill on the Scottish militia, and, of course, her weekly audiences with the Prime Minister. This is where the Queen, who had intended originally, but mobility problems have made this difficult, and she wanted to be absolutely certain things went according to plan. She will receive Boris Johnson and then also his successor, who appears pretty certainly, from what we understand, to be Liz Truss, in what is considered, it's called the kissing hands ceremony. Now, the official description of that these days, of course, it dates back over the centuries. Walpole was the first Prime Minister, and things, of course, were in the 18th century were very, very different then. But this appears to be a handshake is the formality. Equally, Tony Blair in his memoirs talks of actually kissing the Queen's hand. This, it's sort of brushing the hand with the lips and kneeling, is in fact something that has normally happened in the Privy Council ceremony subsequently, but that is likely this year to take place virtually. And there's no question that this begins a relationship with the new Prime Minister, the Queen's 15th. Jim Callaghan, Labour former Prime Minister, described this as friendliness and not friendship. But it's very important, clearly, that the Queen establishes a certain rapport, and according to rumour, she's got on better with some Prime Ministers rather than others. But of course, all of this, or most of it, would appear rumour what her relationship with Margaret Thatcher was, or with Harold Wilson, where she seemed to have got on extremely well. But this is an absolutely pivotal moment, and it will take place, unfortunately, not in Buckingham Palace, but mobility issues have made it uncertain when it comes to timing, so the Queen wanted to make certain this would occur.
And we were seeing there some of the shots of some of her previous Prime Ministers. And of course, as you've rightly said, this will be number 15. Quite incredible when you think about it, Richard. And the third woman. So, of course, it is said that she had a bit of a difficult relationship with Margaret Thatcher. I don't know whether that's true or not. Maybe you want to comment on that, Richard. But this is another female that has come to the fore. Should we mark that as well, Richard?
Well, I think, regarding the Queen's relations with Margaret Thatcher, this is an ongoing source of controversy, and it does seem to depend whether the person giving a view either liked or detested Margaret Thatcher. It should be noted, one has to say this, the Queen has only attended 2 funerals of her former Prime Ministers, Winston Churchill, of course, and Margaret Thatcher. She also, in addition to the Garter, gave Margaret Thatcher the Order of Merit. There's no doubt that they were very different characters, though of similar ages, and there's also absolutely no question that there were differences of emphasis when it came to the Commonwealth regarding a certain leak in 1986, which was become very controversial by her then Press Secretary, Michael Shea. It wouldn't appear that the Queen had much to do with that. But whatever the actual relations between them, there's little doubt, I think there was a great deal of mutual respect. Harold Wilson, on the other hand, seemed to have got on famously. It is said the Queen asked him to stay for drinks after his first meeting, and it is even rumoured that he was allowed to smoke his pipe, although there are those who say he used that as a diversion when it came to difficult subjects when he was on television.
Well, Richard, thank you for joining us this morning and for giving us an insight to what's going to happen on Tuesday, this time up at Balmoral for the very, very first time. And on that point, Paul, Balmoral for the first time, mobility issues, we're told again, but this is a lady who's 96 years old.
Of course, and you have to legislate for that. There's clearly no sign that the Queen is not capable of fulfilling her duties in a functioning sense. You know, she's still clearly got all of her marbles. But the reality is, when you get into your 90s, you're going to suffer those inevitable mobility issues. And I think probably, I'm not a royalist, although I respect the Queen as an individual and the way that she served the country. Clearly, as long as she's able to fulfil her constitutional role, which she is, then I'm sure we've got the wit and the wherewithal as a country to work around that. And if that means sending the next Prime Minister up to Balmoral instead of the Queen coming down here, then I don't think that's a particularly massive issue.
And actually, as a unionist, I think it's a great thing going up to Scotland as part of the kingdom, and that's where it will happen for the very first time. So I think it's a great thing.
Do you think Nicola Sturgeon will be?
Well, I'm not so sure she'll see it as significant like that. But however, Paul, you know I'm the #1 royalist in this organisation, so it's wonderful to see that she's welcoming her number 15 in terms of her Prime Minister. And talking about Parliament, 8 people have been arrested after Extinction Rebellion protesters superglued themselves around the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons and padlocked their necks to the railings outside. Protesters were pictured in the Commons chamber, with some holding signs which read, "Let the people decide," and "Citizens Assembly now." And it's understood they entered the building after booking an official tour before breaking away from the group to stage the protest. So, Paul, what did you make of this protest, and what implications does it have, actually, for security at Parliament?
I think with any campaign, you have to take people with you, but particularly, you know, if it's a campaign about a national issue, such as climate change, the energy crisis and so on. You've got to choose tactics in a way that gets people on board and doesn't alienate people. And I understand, look, at the same time, you want to try to garner as much publicity as you can for your cause. But if by doing that you end up pushing people away because you become basically an irritant, then you're not really achieving anything. And I think that with Extinction Rebellion, that's the effect of some of their tactics. And, you know, sadly, it probably will mean extra security measures in and around Parliament, which then restricts access perhaps to the public. And as an MP, Caroline, obviously that's not a good thing, I wouldn't have thought.
No, and that's not where we want to be. I mean, we are a democracy, and they talk about let the people decide. Well, the people did decide, and the decision was that the people they elected are in that place. Show some respect. I was really crossed by it.
And I you know, what angers me sometimes is that some of these protesters want to give the impression that they have a monopoly of compassion over the issue of the planet. You know, like the rest of us who don't necessarily agree with all of their agenda or their tactics are somehow heartless and callous, and we want to see the planet burn. Actually, these issues are very, very complex, and they sometimes require nuanced answers. And simply taking, as we touched on before, the cliff edge approach, which says, you know, cut every coal-fired power station, let's rely on renewables, even though they're unreliable. Well, that's going to impact on people as well. And some of us are compassionate about people, you know, who can't use their dialysis machines, and people who can't heat their homes and so on. It's not just one side of the debate that has all the compassion on.
And just briefly, because we're running out of time at the end of the hour, but I mean, Caroline, this idea that there's no democracy and we should let the people decide. I mean, we have Westminster is held up as the mother of Parliament, and yet they go in and trash it.
And I was insulted, actually. I thought it's really rude. It does them no favours at all. It will stop other people being able to access the building because the security will get tighter and tighter. And you know, Arlene, the people who work in that building work really, really hard to protect the building and to protect us as people in there. And I feel really sorry for them that they're now going to be under the spotlight because somebody decides to go in and break all the rules. You can't just break all the rules and get away with it. I was really, really distressed by it.
It is distressing because, as you say, there'll now be a review. More resources will be spent on the review, and people will be looking to hold somebody responsible when actually all they were trying to do was to take people around Parliament.
And I was stuck in that chamber when there was a gunman outside who murdered a policeman. I know what it feels like to be in there when you're under threat. If this is allowed to carry on, we're all going to be in there every day under threat. It's not right, it's not fair for democracy, and it doesn't do their cause any good at all.
No. If they want to have a discussion about net zero and about energy, let's have that discussion, but let us not put Parliament under threat. I totally agree with you.
evening, the UK weather is looking unsettled as low pressure sits to the west of us, bringing in spells of rain. Let's take a look at the details. Southwest England will see further showers. Some could be heavy and perhaps thundery as well, turning windy for a time, especially around the coasts. Mostly dry across southeast England and London, with clear spells and generally light winds, the possibility of a few showers mainly in the north. An increasing risk of showery rain across southern parts of Wales this evening. This could be heavy in places and perhaps thundery too, turning windy. Mostly cloudy this evening across the Midlands, with an increasing risk of a few showers, which could be on the heavy side. Feeling quite humid with the temperatures around 19 Celsius and wind staying light. A mixed end to the day for north-east England. There will be the risk of a few showers, though most places should stay dry. Wind staying light with temperatures around 21 Celsius. A mainly dry evening.